I blame YouTube commenter JH5578 for me sitting in this field of cows right now. He or she commented on my saturated fat episode. Great in-depth work as always. Because of your background in earth science, I'd love to see you do a video on the meat industry and low-carb claims that ruminant meat is positive for the environment and greenhouse gas sequestration. It's a frustrating talking point ever since Allan Savory's TED Talk. I thought for sure I'd get slapped by the comments in the saturated fat episode because that topic is so hotly contested. But I got about as much pushback as you can see cows in that field back there. I swear there were a lot of cows in this field when I was setting up. I can prove it. That saturated fat episode was 32 minutes long with just a minute dedicated to earth science, but that's where I took a beating. Caitlin, do you think YouTube commenters have it in for me?
Obviously.
Oh, you know, this time they asked me to join the fray on whether cows are good for the environment.
Watch out, the internet trolls are coming for you. Global warming is a hoax. Don't take my burgers. It sounded like burgers.
In part one of this episode, I'll respond to the beating I took because I think the comments were valid and quite important. And then you can decide early whether I'm an idiot and you should just bail from this episode. In part two, I'd like to explain why I think topics like cows and the environment have become so insanely controversial when the science is really quite simple. In part three, I'll take the road less traveled to try to cut through the insanity, and we'll see if that makes all the difference. Part one from Home Dog 2. What makes me want to vomit is when the mention of saving the planet comes up. Oh yeah, humans are controlling tsunamis, earthquakes, and other disasters. Bunch of fools. I've never met the earth scientists who thought they could control tsunamis, volcanoes, and earthquakes, but I think they've saved millions of lives designing early warning systems for tsunamis and volcanoes, and for figuring out the science of how you make buildings that don't fall over on people when earthquakes strike. When I was a visiting scientist at Stanford, I made a documentary that aired on PBS, and we ended the documentary by saying,
"There remains only one thing we can do about earthquakes. We can build better. It is not earthquakes that kill people. Buildings do."
Those are my children running through the stone arches of Stanford, and not many years later, Stanford invested a fortune in reinforcing those arches with steel to prevent a repeat of the 1906 disaster. The amazing Jimmy said, "I agree with this guy on nutrition, but he's wrong when it comes to climatology. Not one doomsday scenario that has been predicted by these climate fearmongers has ever come true. Remember An Inconvenient Truth? According to that documentary, all the ice caps are supposed to be gone and coastal cities underwater. Never happened, but that's just one of the hundreds of predictions that climatologists that subscribe to the doomsday ideology have made. Doomsday climatology just doesn't hold up to the scientific method." Let's fact check that.
Starting in 1970, there was a precipitous drop-off in the amount and extent and thickness of the Arctic ice cap. It has diminished by 40% in 40 years. And there are now two major studies showing that within the next 50 to 70 years, in summertime, it will be completely gone.
But the point I want to make about the melting of the Arctic is that this graphic shows in red how the Arctic sea ice has declined in area. The 13 squiggly lines behind it, we're trying to calculate by algorithms in the 200 years what would happen to the Arctic sea ice. And that's the British, the Americans, various centers, 13 different models. Now look at what's happened with the red decline of the sea ice compared to the 13 models. The sea ice has disappeared, melted, much faster than all of the models. While some people think we may be exaggerating about climate change and sea level rise, the fact is this is pretty good proof that the scientific community, if anything, is understating climate risk.
A decade after An Inconvenient Truth, some Arctic ice models have been revised to be more aggressive, projecting no summer Arctic ice by 2035.
And by the way, 10 years ago, when the movie An Inconvenient Truth came out, the single most criticized scene in that movie was an animated scene showing that the combination of sea level rise and storm surge would put the ocean water into the 9/11 memorial site, which was then under construction. And people said, "That's ridiculous. What a terrible exaggeration."
Something happened last night at one of the most iconic locations in New York, the World Trade Center, Ground Zero. A flood of water with a current so strong it flooded the reconstruction.
Oh, so you wanted cows, huh? I got your cows right back there. David W., I'm still waiting for the ice age we were promised 50 years ago. Ha 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 ha. That's actually a pretty impressive laugh, and I got a smile. Let's see if we can top that. But seriously, David does make a very valid comment. A lot of people ask about that. And we did predict that we were going into an ice age. Here's why and why it changed.
Actually, this diagram is the fruit of decades of paleoscience using sediment cores, ice cores from many places around the world, which by now enables us to reconstruct the evolution of global average temperature since the last ice age 20,000 years ago. And you see here the warming from the ice age into the Holocene by about 4 degrees, then a very slow gradual cooling trend. And as many of you will know, these ice ages are caused by cycles of the Earth orbit, and primarily what we see here is the precession cycle, which has a period of 23,000 years and is the shortest of these cycles. And we are pretty certain that this long-term cooling trend from the mid-Holocene would have continued if human activities had not sharply bent round this curve, and with 100 years, we have undone more than 5,000 years of cooling. And we should also not forget that this warming by 4 degrees meant that 2/3 of the continental ice masses from the last ice age melted, raising global sea level by about 120 meters. And we still have enough ice on Earth to raise the global sea level by about 65 meters.
And that brings me to part 2 of this episode. What are the forces that confuse us? Is it as simple as what Carl Sagan and Paul Simon had to say?
All lies and jest, still the man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest.
When it comes to cows and the environment, there are a lot of different beliefs. So I made a chart, and I put the different beliefs on the chart with the size of the circle being proportional to the number of views they got on social media. You'll notice where the scientists are tiny little specks. I know some of you are thinking, wait, what? There were scientists involved in those popular bubbles. More about that in part 3. Michael Mann is a respected professor of earth science who speaks up about the forces that shape our beliefs in the climate debate. So I read his book. Oh, you think the beef and dairy councils are good at creating confusion and science denial? Minor leagues compared to climate. I see your beef and dairy councils and I raise you the Koch brothers, ExxonMobil, and the Murdoch media empire. Dr. Mann points out that hard climate science denial is so last decade because even political strategist Frank Luntz, who crafted the original talking points that got us fighting in the first place, now admits that climate change is real, caused by man, and so do Exxon and Chevron.
I will tell you, as someone who challenged climate change 19 years ago, which is when the media uses the language against me. That work was done in 2000, 2001, and 2002. That was a lifetime ago. I've changed.
But there are plenty of strategies to keep selling oil and coal. One genius move is deflection, making it all about our personal responsibility, thereby absolving the polluters of any responsibility. It's an old but amazing playbook. Here's a classic example.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it.
Note the wording. People create pollution and people can stop it. That ad moved me so much as a teen, I still obsessively pick up junk everywhere I go 50 years later. You gotta love a group called Keep America Beautiful, right? Turns out the group was founded a year after Vermont passed a law requiring beer companies to sell their beer in reusable, returnable bottles. Sadly, it's mainly a front group for beer bottlers, can companies, and soda makers. As more states came to think, companies create pollution with their disposable bottles, and legislation can stop it, Keep America Beautiful worked to defeat those bills. It's genius because millions of Americans volunteer every year through Keep America Beautiful to pick up disposable bottles. It's free labor for the companies, and having their brand on litter is not a good look. 50 years later, how are all those disposable bottles working out for us? A lot of people feel like we've been played.
You've helped come up with some notable terms in our political discourse. Energy exploration, how'd you come up with that?
It was trying to understand how to create a more positive vision.
And that was instead of what phrase?
Instead of drilling for oil.
Climate change, not global warming.
Yes.
Okay, I think that is brilliant, not manipulative.
If you're a Swedish scientist and you produce data to show how bad the warming problem is, you get respect because to them it's science. In America, if you produce a chart like that, you get subpoenas and investigations because in America it's politics.
And I found myself at the center of this circus, if you like, because of this graph that my co-authors and I published a decade and a half ago. It came to be known as the hockey stick, despite the fact that now, several years later, there have been 9 different investigations in the US and the UK. Every one of them has found that there was no evidence of impropriety on the part of the scientists.
Dr. Mann lists a lot more tricks companies play to shape our beliefs, but I want to touch on one from Rachel Reynolds, which is more about our personal human nature on social media, because social media is such a big factor in what we believe.
Narrative theory centers on the idea that people are drawn to storytelling. Stories are fun. We love learning about them, we love sharing them, we love learning from them. How many of you have heard of the hero's journey? Where the hero receives a call to adventure, they leave what is known and comfortable, receive guidance from a mentor, face challenges and temptations, find whatever they are looking for, and are transformed as a result. Sound familiar? Without even thinking too hard, I can give you thousands of examples. Harry Potter, Star Wars, The Odyssey, Men in Black. Every superhero origin story ever follows this format. And challenges and temptations take form in the role of the shadow. In the conspiracy narrative, the shadow is traditional belief in authority organizations. Conspiracy theorists are really good at telling stories.
Social media is filled with influencers on the hero's journey whom we love. A lot of the most popular ones have very little scientific background like Joe Rogan, but they can spend full time making videos while the scientists can only dedicate a sliver of their time to doing that. And they can rack up millions of views by having very controversial scientists as guests. I always want to know, why is this scientist so controversial? Is it because some companies or political groups want to discredit them? Or maybe the scientist is a denier for hire by some industry? Or maybe other scientists think they're weak and want to correct their facts? And that brings up part 3, cows. Who doesn't love cows? Remember that chart I glossed over? Outside of scientific circles, the lion's share of people are getting their info from the top row. If you've watched Cowspiracy and Allan Savory's TED Talk, you're thinking, wait, will cows save the planet or blow it up? Who can know? I think the teams of scientists on the bottom row, whose careers are devoted to the intersection of agriculture and climate, can. We'll go to that road less traveled after I make a few comments about the top row. Starting at the far right, regenerative agriculture sounds amazing. 3 of the leading lights of that community got together on a podcast hosted by Paul Saladino, the carnivore MD, plus the authors of a new book and documentary, Sacred Cow. Who doesn't want to believe cows out in the grass can enrich soils and sequester carbon? I know I do. We'll see what the scientists in the lower row say when we get to them. Paul is on the hero's journey as a psychiatrist after learning about high-meat diets on the Joe Rogan podcast a few years ago. For him, the shadow is mainstream science.
Yet another lie we've been told is that animals are destroying the environment.
The 3 of them have a very deep belief that meat is the most nutritious food and living without it would be catastrophic.
You really can't ignore the fact that animal foods are incredibly nutritious. And if you remove those from the diet for what essentially would be a 2.6% reduction in greenhouse gases, which would probably almost certainly have zero effect on global climate change, you would create massive, pervasive, catastrophic nutritional deficiencies across the population.
But as Dr. Marion Nessel said on one of my previous episodes, the biggest PR problem the beef industry has is that people who substitute other whole foods for beef are healthier.
The folks that are advocating this kind of vegan life way, this vegan-centric model, It's all sound bites, elevator pitches, moral superiority, meat causes cancer, meat destroys the environment, and it's kind of compelling.
They kept referring to vegans in this episode when I think they should have said scientists, because as we'll see, not all climate scientists are vegan. But the research into climate has led almost all of them to eat way less animal foods, especially beef.
The vast herds of grazing animals, pre-Columbian era in the Americas, why was the planet not destroyed then?
I keep having to move because of the noise of farm equipment around here. This comment caught my attention because it's everywhere on the internet. Here's the thing, when buffaloes roamed the plain, it was a closed system. They absorbed carbon and nitrogen from the grass they ate and returned it to the soil when they pooped or died. Agriculture is more like mining. You extract something from the closed system, ship it to Manhattan where somebody dines on it, and they poop it out in a toilet instead of on the plains. Ooh. Nitrogen is the elephant in the room for agriculture because few plants can generate it and no animals can. Legumes like prairie clover can fix nitrogen in the soil under the right circumstances, but whether they can keep up depends on how many crops and animals we extract. And that's the reason for the explosive rise of chemical fertilizers. The second bubble is from the YouTube channel What I've Learned, which got 2.8 million views with the title, "Eating Less Meat Will Not Save the Planet." Joseph Everett, who runs the channel, is not a scientist, and he too believes a low-carb diet is best for health. He did the episode with a smart scientist, Frank Mittliner, who the planet needs because his job, funded by industry, is to figure out how to raise cows with the lowest impact possible. If we're going to raise cows, we need Dr. Mittliner to keep the impact as low as possible.
We have decreased our beef herd in red, but drastically increased beef production.
Dr. Mittliner is a fascinating and quite entertaining promoter of animal agriculture, but quite the spinmeister.
Do you know how many dairy cows we have in the United States? Somebody says 9 million. I say, yes. But how many horses do we have in the United States? They don't know. 9.5 million horses. We have more horses in the United States than dairy cows. And then I asked him, have you ever heard anybody proclaiming a rightless Tuesday?
He knows horses aren't ruminants and emit a fraction of the methane cows emit. He also knows it's about meatless Mondays, not dairy-free Mondays, and there are 94 million cows in the U.S., dwarfing the number of dairy cows. His talks are filled with hyperbole like that. The What I Learned episode on meat was so insane, Earthling Ed, Mike the Vegan, Nutrition Made Simple, and Unnatural Vegan all rushed to debunk it. Staying consistent with giving voice to scientists, I'll recommend Nutrition Made Simple's episode because Dr. Carvalho is a solid, very well-educated scientist.
Yeah, if we keep producing all of the animal food, even though all the animals are gone, yeah, the emissions are not going to come down as much. But no one is suggesting that as a solution.
Allan Savory really lit up the stage at TED because who doesn't want to believe you can transform landscapes like he has with cows?
There is only one option. I repeat to you, only one option left to climatologists and scientists, and that is to do the unthinkable and to use livestock, bunched and moving, as a proxy for former herds and predators and mimic nature.
And Cowspiracy lit it up with this bold claim.
In 2009, 2 advisors from the World Bank released an analysis on human-induced greenhouse gases, finding that animal agriculture was responsible not for 18%, as the UN stated, but was actually 51% of all greenhouse gases.
If you're confused about these dueling answers, maybe it's comforting to hear what the scientists had to say at Oxford University's Food Science Network. Their careers depend on knowing the answer. Here's Dr. Tara Garnett.
There just seems to be a kind of cacophony of different voices at the moment on the whole livestock issue. We were confused. We thought we really wanted to try and get to the bottom of this argument.
She led a 2-year study that involved several universities and prominent research institutes that led to this 128-page report that took me all day to digest. Turns out collecting the data from farming operations all over the world is a mind-blowing undertaking. But once you see the data, the answers are amazingly simple and clear. Lucky for us, a number of research teams from around the world tackled the problem, and I depended on 5 of them to see if their results jived with each other. Let's hear from Dr. Joseph Poore, also from Oxford, who led a different multi-year study published in Science.
In this map, black areas are urban, representing about 1 to 2% of the world's land area. Yellow areas are croplands. Red areas are grazing lands. In total, agriculture occupies over half the world's land. In the foreground is a beef farm. In the background is the Amazon rainforest. And if you look at this farm from satellite imagery, what you see is it's just one of millions of farms in Brazil carved out of what was pristine rainforest only 10, 20, or 50 years ago. And this swathe of farmland that's just beginning to emerge on the screen now spans much of the south of the continent, stretching right round here. Much of this deforestation has been for beef, for the local South American market, and for soy to feed pigs, especially in Asia. Since 2000, we've lost an area of tropical forest to agriculture the size of the UK, Ireland, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and Poland combined. Today, meat, aquaculture, eggs, and dairy use 83% of the world's farmland and contribute nearly 60% of food's different emissions, despite providing just 37% of our protein and 18% of our calories. And we wanted to understand this question. Is it possible to produce animal products more sustainably and redress this vast imbalance? High-impact beef is creating 1,000% more emissions than low-impact beef and using 5,000% more land than low-impact beef for the same amount of protein. Staggering, huge variability. However, even the lowest impact beef per 100 grams of protein is responsible for 6 times more greenhouse gas emissions and 36 times more land than beans and pulses.
Okay, that chart was complicated. Turns out there's a third group associated with Oxford, Our World in Data, whose mission is to bridge the gap between science and public understanding through their famous charts. Hannah Ritchie is the research director there, and she has a PhD in global food systems and its environmental impacts. This one is the carbon footprint of protein-rich foods, and you see that beef and lamb are off the charts. It's wildly variable with beef. I'm assuming Frank Mittliner's beef is the best back here, but it's still 10 times higher than beans and peas. Pigs and chickens are not ruminants like cattle, sheep, and goats are, so they have a much lower greenhouse footprint. One thing that makes legumes so environmentally friendly is they need little to no nitrogen fertilizer. Beef and lamb are the biggest land users too, but as Big Ag knows, land is money, so if you pack the most animals into the smallest space and don't let them move around, they fatten easier, and that's why beef land use is so variable. Allan Savory's grazing uses a lot of land. Last chart from Hannah, environmental impacts from agriculture. On the left, you see the 26% emissions most scientists use for total food. That's half as much as Cowspiracy claimed for just cows alone, and that's because Cowspiracy included CO2 emissions from cows breathing. That doesn't seem fair to most scientists. You see agriculture uses 70% of fresh water, and 78% of the pollution in our streams and oceans is caused by agriculture. And it's by far the biggest factor in biodiversity loss. So what about grazing and Allan Savory? Back to Dr. Garnett.
The amount of animal protein that we get from grazing-only ruminants is really, really low. Grazing systems don't provide us with a great deal to eat.
Agriculture scientists use the word extensive to mean cows out in pasture eating grass. They say intensive to mean tightly packed, eating grain. That should help for understanding this chart.
Beef in more extensive systems tend to have higher emissions than beef in intensive systems, higher emissions than other animal products.
The next chart has too much to read, but the headline and what she says are important.
So you can see that the claims from the non-peer-reviewed studies are wildly higher than those that have been academically peer-reviewed.
Okay, but the thrust of Allan Savory's TED Talk was restoring soil health and avoiding land becoming desert, right? I'll get to that. In the meantime, if scientists say we have to cut back on meat, what are they suggesting our diets be? Let's go to Johns Hopkins.
Here at the Center for Livable Future, my colleagues and I are producing a growing body of literature, taking a closer look at what these dietary shifts might look like in practice and how they might vary by geography. So it's been well established, this is from our paper in 2019, that the greenhouse gas intensity of producing animal foods, shown on the right, is in most, not all, but in most cases, all else being equal, an order of magnitude greater than the greenhouse gas intensity of producing plant foods, shown on the left. Now, there are some exceptions. There are some climate-friendly animal foods, particularly small fish like sardines and anchovies, and insects like crickets and mealworms. You'll note that these are animals that are low on the food chain.
That's great news for paleo enthusiasts because insects were definitively part of our ancestral diets. So you can take these snack bags, Amazon's choice, to the theater and share with people sitting around you. Just tell them they're Paleo Cheetos.
So this is some of our research. We measured the greenhouse gas profile of plant-forward diets, healthy plant-forward diets, specific to 150 countries. And these are our results for the United States. And we counted for trade patterns and country of origin and everything else we talked about. The y-axis is the greenhouse gas intensity of the dietary pattern per capita. And the baseline is a close reflection of the current US food supply. And on the far right, we have the vegan diet, exclusively plant-based, and a low food chain diet. And what was surprising to us, so the EAT-Lancet Commission has a target for greenhouse gas emissions in 2050 from the food system. We have to stay below this target to avoid the most catastrophic climate outcomes. And there are only 2 diets in the United States that were below this threshold.
The 2 diets that make the grade have a little headroom, which brings up our 5th distinguished research team, the EAT-Lancet Commission. They're an international team of over 30 notables in earth science, nutrition, and agriculture. One co-founder is Johan Rockström, who appeared with David Attenborough in a Netflix special on planetary boundaries based on Dr. Rockström's book, which I loved. He also has a cookbook called The World Changing Cookbook. The team spent several years researching a diet that would optimize the intersection of human and planetary health around the world, and they discovered what the other teams had, that it had to be mainly whole plants.
But this is the best assessment we have today of what does the state of science say in terms of healthy diets from sustainable food systems.
The other co-founder is Walter Willett, notable for running Harvard School of Public Health for many years.
Probably the most perhaps controversial, are the quite modest amounts of red meat here from beef, pork, or lamb, which we identified as about 14 grams a day. By standards of North America and much of Europe, that may seem like quite a small amount, but this is actually about the amount that people were eating in the Mediterranean countries, the traditional Mediterranean diet, when those people were the healthiest people in the world. So this is not radical, despite what you might hear from our friends in the beef industry. It's a change for us. What does that mean on a 14 grams a day is sort of a nano burger, if that's what you are having. But of course, that's not what we're really talking about. What it means is about a big juicy hamburger once a week, if you want it, or a big juicy steak once a month, if you want it, which is sort of how people treated red meat in the traditional Mediterranean diet. It was something that was special for birthdays, for holidays, religious events.
So after all those years of research from all those scientists, how important do they think diet really is?
What is clear is that the climate benefits of changing your diet are far greater than cutting down on your flights or buying an electric car. And what's more, for a typical average consumer, diet change isn't just the single biggest way to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, it's the single biggest way to reduce your land use, your impact on biodiversity, the nitrogen and phosphorus pollution caused by your food, the acid rain, the water use, and probably, although we didn't specifically measure it, the pesticide and antibiotic use that is being caused by the food system. Put simply, avoiding meat and dairy products is probably the single biggest way to reduce your impact on the planet.
But not only that, we know that it's in the next 5 years that we determine whether we've consumed the remaining global carbon budget, and we know that the food system is the sine qua non if we will succeed or fail with that transition.
Okay, suppose you're the carnivore trio and mainstream science is your shadow, and you believe everything we just heard is lies, sound bites, and moral superiority. Where do you find your truth?
It's striking how different these narratives are. I'll screen share. So this is from the Quantis lifecycle analysis for White Oak Pastures. We'll put a link to this in the show notes.
So that publication was funded by General Mills, and they use it for marketing. They own the Epic brand of jerky and place charts from the publication on Epic's website. It has an astonishing claim that cows are a carbon sink, and as a result, the carnivore trio believe cows can offset emissions from transportation.
If we make a horrible decision and create Planet of the Vegans, then we have zero capacity to offset the emissions from the transportation sector.
I would never have read this because I thought it was pure marketing, but the carnivore trio is so sold on it, I wanted to know what this biological magic trick is that other scientists may have missed.
I haven't even seen the vegans. They just kind of ignore this, and they don't even say that Quantis was like unethical in this process.
And lucky for us, they published a peer-reviewed version and revealed the magic behind the scenes. Gone is the claim in the peer-reviewed version that cows are a carbon sink, but they claim they have a 66% lower footprint while emitting 34% more greenhouse gases. How does that work? Go on. The idea is, by eating grass, cows induce the plants to send down deeper roots, which contain carbon. And the cows poop out what they eat, adding more carbon to the soil. They use rotational grazing, keeping the grass higher than in normal pastures, so there's also more carbon above the ground. It seems like a magic trick. While cows remove carbon from the pasture and vaporize it in their breath, they enrich the pasture with carbon. And how do they replenish all the nitrogen the cows take with them when they go to slaughter? Trick number 1 is they let pigs and chickens share the pasture, but feed them 80% corn and 20% soy. I guess they bring the feed in from a feed store? The pigs and chickens are pooping that feed in the pastures, and that's where important nitrogen and carbon are coming from. Trick number 2, White Oak Pastures, the farm the study is based on, buys depleted land and restores the soil by not overgrazing it and by letting the chickens and pigs poop their soy and corn everywhere. Depleted soil will absorb carbon for a while, but studies show it levels off with time. Number 3, do some tricksy math to subtract the carbon going into the soil from the extra greenhouse gas that the cows are emitting from eating grass. The paper also said the farm takes 2.5 times the land area of farms that raise cows conventionally. So hold on, we're using this technique to avoid desertification, but we're turning the Amazon rainforest into a desert because we're out of land, and Allan Savory wants to multiply the land requirements for raising cattle by 2.5 times? No wonder the scientists are freaking out about him.
And what we concluded was that current trends in meat and dairy demand are not sustainable. If we maintained our current trajectories of demand for meat, but supplied it all through grass-fed systems, the consequences for land use change would be catastrophic.
And one of the things that they say is, well, I mean, what you're doing is fine, Will, but you can't feed the world like that. And my response is, I don't know that I'm supposed to feed the world. I think I'm supposed to feed my community.
Remember that first pasture I sat in? Overgrazed, but on the other side of the fence there's taller grass and even trees. If I put my drone in the air, you can see the neighbor's field, which has no large grazing animals. The green patches are Scotch broom, an invasive species that has the advantage in a depleted field because it can fix nitrogen. That's the stuff I sat in when you thought I was being a nutcase. It's as tall as the kids, and the next neighbor planted trees. It's as simple as you think it is. The more plant matter you build above and below the ground, the less carbon is in the atmosphere melting polar ice. Just look at how much carbon this orchard can store compared to any cow pasture, no matter how high the grass. I said in the beginning that the answer on how to preserve our gorgeous pale blue dot was utterly simple. Eat whole foods, mostly plants, not too much, and go especially easy on the beef. And can I just say, science is so awesome, it's like a candle in the dark. Thank you for watching that whole long episode. My wife said there's too much science in there, throw some overboard. So I threw the stuff overboard about the adorable buffaloes and how they're different for grasslands than cattle are. That hurt my soul. But anyway, if you have an episode suggestion for me, or you just want to slap me around, you know what to do.